Listening is communicating. My name is Catherine Cantey. I am an executive coach and a podcast host of Business Vitality. And I had an amazing conversation with Oscar Trimboli. I would love for you to stay tuned. I have a recording that I'm going to share with you where we're just talking about the importance of listening when it comes to communicating. Recently, I was invited to speak with a group of professionals on communication. And I thought, instead of us talking about talking, what if we talk about listening and what it is that we can learn from just listening to other people that are around us? So, wanted to share this recording with you. I think Oscar is phenomenal. He is on the other side of the world. I'm in the Southeast US, so I talk a little funny Southern, and Oscar is in Australia. So, even though we are too far away to get together in person, we were able to get together and create this video, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you. Please check out his book, his work, everything that's out there. He makes listening fun. And for those of you that are new to finding me, my name is Catherine Cantey. I'm an executive coach and a podcast host of Business Vitality. On Business Vitality, we share best practices of what leaders are doing to continue to remain vital in business year after year, decade after decade. And listening and communicating is a vital business skill that we need to continue to work on. And as Oscar likes to share, this is stuff that people don't teach us in school. So how do we learn? And he's able to share some of his tips and tricks with us. Thanks so much for being here. If you're curious and want to learn more about me and my work, you can find me obviously on this LinkedIn page, but you can also find me at catherinecantey.com. I work with teams, individuals, leaders, and organizations to help create measurable leadership change. And we do that using practical applications. The world is too complicated as it is. Let's get back to the practical applications that create measured results. The process that we use has been proven for 4 decades. And the great thing about it is it helps accelerate the impact within the organization. Thanks again for being here. And here's Oscar.
Oscar Trimboli, you are the head of coaching faculty of the Marketing Academy, found on the web at themarketingacademy.org. Thank you for joining us.
G'day, Catherine. Great to see you again.
It is wonderful to see you. We spoke earlier this year about your book, How to Listen, and I thought this was such a nice touch. You shared this beautiful box, nice box. You open it up. It has a small version of the book for those of us who don't like to read big books. Some of us are out there. And then you made it even more fun, and you have playing cards, and the name of the playing cards is Deep Listening. And I have to share with people that this has been fantastic. What I thought was just going to be just a great conversation with a talented man who's in Australia and I'm in America. I thought it would just be just a normal conversation to learn. And I have since taken this information and read the book and continue to look at the notes, reference the previous podcast, number 140 on Business Vitality, took this and worked with a group of 40 leaders who wanted a conversation on communicating. They said, we need to learn how to better communicate with our teams. I made a whole theme out of listening is communicating. And to see their minds shift has been fantastic. How often I reference your work with the speaking engagements that I have with working with teams and individuals to help create measurable leadership change has been fantastic. So I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I have just been loving it and find ways to drip it into my life and other people's lives all the time. So thank you.
Well, the difference between hearing and listening is action, and I'm grateful for the action you've taken. We're on a quest with the Deep Listening Ambassadors to create 100 million deep listeners in the world, and sounds like we're creating artifacts and tools that are simple to use and impactful when we do it, whether it's in prison systems or with school principals. The deep listening playing cards, they have a whimsical way. They have little characters on the front, and people just pause in the moment and often make that simple reflection that you can have a powerful impact in your communication, bringing your presence. Because if you're leading any system, you'll get discretionary effort from those who are in it if they feel heard, seen, and valued, if you listen to them. So it brings me great joy, puts lots of gas in my tank to hear that.
I've got a couple of examples. One was with a group of the 40 leaders that are growing into some senior roles, senior positions, and they're all learning and growing, want to accelerate and take on the world like we all do when we're younger. And what hit home for them was that we think at 900 words a minute and we speak at 125 words a minute. And that came from you. And they said, oh, well, then maybe that's why when someone finally speaks, I'm so impatient and I just want to jump to what the conclusion is. They said, I never realized that we're thinking at 900 words a minute, but we're only speaking at 125. And it just was really eye-opening for them to hear that and to be able to understand the importance of reflection time before you go and speak and meet with someone, because you can really clarify your message, but nobody teaches in school the importance of reflection and maybe the why behind it, the 900 words versus the 125. Have you seen that in your, I mean, obviously I feel like you've seen it, but do you have an example that comes to mind that maybe you can share?
Yeah, and many of the great traditions across the globe, religious traditions, I'm not being denomination specific, there is a reason all those religions have a time for pause and reflection. All the great musicians, orchestras, and bands all pause for 5 minutes to tune their instrument before a performance, whether their instrument is their voice as a singer, a violin, a piano. It's a sign of wisdom, it's a sign of respect, it's a sign of professionalism to prepare to listen, because listening for the gap that you just talked about, the 14% of what people say the very first time, the 86% of what's missing, we hear around the globe across all industries, whether they're commercial, non-for-profit, or public sector. That simple sentence summarizes how to listen. You don't have to read the book if you understand that ratio. That ratio, that the first thing somebody says is roughly 14%. I was corrected by an actuary the other day saying it was 13.82 something percent. And I said, yes, you're right. And I rounded up to 14. When you know that, you'll pause and you will change the way the speaker communicates. The speaker will then say what they think and what they mean. And the dirty little secret, Katie, is meetings are shorter as a result because people actually get to say what matters to them. People say what they think and what they mean, and then you don't have to come back next week, next month, next quarter in some kind of progress meeting to go, oh, that's not what I thought you said. And there's less confusion. If you're in commercial settings, this means more profit. It means you win the right kind of customers. It means you keep great employees. It means you hear the obstacles that are in their way. And if you're struggling to recruit new staff in your organization because it's tough to find talent, you'll have invisible recruiters in your own employees who'll say, you should come work for us because our leader actually listens. It's really a differentiation. And the same is true for customers as well. So we see many stories of that. And in the book, we talk about an example with one of my clients who is struggling in frustration about the organization she runs in professional services, and it's structured with basically a commercial division facing all the for-profit customers and a public sector division. And she's frustrated beyond doubt about the growth of the public sector group. And she used phrases like, they're always difficult to deal with. They're always very expensive to sell to. And when she finished and paused, there was a big gap. And I just smiled back at her and I said, always? And she said, nothing. She paused. She took a sigh. Her eyes looked up in the corner of the room and she smiled back at me and she said, all right, not always. But you have to imagine someone saying that in a very proper English accent. And I said, are you open to an experiment? And she said, sure. I said, think about the public sector customers that are not always. And she went, okay, not sure what you mean. I said, well, line up all your public sector customers in this room and put the ones that are growing the least over there and the ones that are growing the most over there. And she said, oh, okay. I said, what do they have in common? And she had this huge smile on her face. She said, they act like for-profit organizations. And then I just said nothing. And you could see she was processing what she just said.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, why have we got those customers in our public sector division? And it wasn't a question directed at me. It was just her musing out aloud. And she held that and she came back and she said, what do you think, Oscar? And I said, you know, what I think is interesting, but I think what matters most is what your team in the public sector thinks about this. And she smiled and she goes, yep, I need to go and listen to them, don't I? And so she went. A year later, they reconfigured that division and that division looks very different. And the growth they're getting from that division is very different because she started to listen to herself very differently. When people use phrases like always, Katie, you're hearing the edge of their mental models. You're hearing the edge of their assumptions. And it's not your job to point out the assumption. It's just play back one word. If you hear always, never, exactly, precisely, these are clues to help you liberate your employees' thinking, your customers' thinking, your suppliers' thinking, the governments you work with, the regulators. So that's just one example of a fun story where I was actually in the room when somebody realized there's 86% of their thinking they hadn't said out aloud.
That's a wonderful story. And it makes me think about that power of reflection and thinking. And people say they're too busy to take the time to think. And really, if we don't take that time, we're just never going to be able to progress and be able to take on more and figure out how to work towards that goal. So, you know, I struggle with it myself, taking that time to sit and be calm. And I know that when I'm the busiest, that's when I need to sit down and have that quiet time and that reflection. And even this morning, I said, gosh, I don't have time to meditate. But I said, this is exactly the morning I need to meditate a little bit longer. And when I do, that's when I can really set the tone of the day to be successful, even though if I hadn't taken that time, it would have just been reactive, and it's not gonna work. So it's
and for those listening, if you think meditation is a bridge too far, I'll give you a step towards that. Just play a song, but do nothing while you're listening to that song for 3 to 5 minutes. This will be a great circuit breaker for you, a great way to rewire your intention, a great way to set yourself up for success. So if you think meditation is a step too far for you, play a song. 3 minutes or more, but 3 minutes would be the minimum, and you'll be surprised how you turn up in a conversation with some music to rewire your mindset.
I think that's fantastic. And, it took me a while to get into meditation in the first place, so I can relate to maybe I just have 15 seconds of quiet in the car and just be with myself before I get out for a meeting. And even that can just help reset things. I was speaking with someone earlier today, and I thought this might be a great question for Oscar. And the question is, what advice do we have for leaders who are going from maybe an independent contributor role to managing a team? And we notice that we promote people to manage lots of people, but we don't give them training necessarily. We give them a promotion, we give them a raise, we give them a bigger office, we give them more equipment, more responsibilities. There's no real training. And so the opportunity is, what training or what words of advice would we have for them? And I immediately think of you and listening and the power that they can really have to build a great team. But I would love to hear from you for those people that are transitioning into that C-suite or even managing groups for the first time, teams. What are your thoughts on how to hit the ground running and how to succeed?
Congratulations, you've been promoted. You need to make a decision now that you've changed profession. You may have been an engineer who's been promoted to group engineer. You may be an accountant that's been promoted to manager of finance. You are no longer your professional background. You have now changed profession. You've changed profession into management and leadership. This means you have to change the way you think about yourself from a skilled expert to a potent leader. Your role has changed from being the best to getting the best from others. Your role has changed from being the best to helping this team perform at an even higher level. You have changed profession. Until you make that decision, everything else I'm going to say is a complete waste of time. Katie, I don't know about you, but I see people going in to conversations where they've been promoted and a staff member brings to them a problem, and they are so quick to go back to their old identity. Let me show you how this is solved. They get up on a whiteboard, they go into the computer code, they sit down and draft an email for them. And that's a signal that you haven't changed profession. That's no longer your role. It's no longer what you're getting paid to do. So Katie, I'm sure you see versions of this yourself.
I do. I work with some talented, amazing people who have done a fantastic job of where they are and want to just take it 1% and 2% better. And they're high performers and they get results. And now we're having to shift from doing to leading, and knowing that 80% of what somebody else can do gives you 100% of your time to be able to strategize and to make, to lead the team. And It's easy for us to get back into the old ways because that's how we were rewarded. That's how we were recognized. And, as Marshall Goldsmith, he wrote a book about what got you here won't get you there. And so it's such a simple idea, but it's just not easy to let go of what allowed us to succeed in the past. And one gentleman I'm working with right now, he's fantastic. And the feedback came back that they wanted him to leave his phone in the office when he comes into meetings and leave the computer in the office, but just to come into the meeting and just be present and just listen to what the needs are. And of course, be there early or be there, 2 minutes early, just to be respectful of the team. And a couple months come by and he comes back to me and he says, I just feel weird, Katie. This is bizarre. I show up, I walk around, I listen to people. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing the work. He says, I really feel like I'm doing less, but we're able to get more done. He said, it just feels really, really weird to do that. But the feedback that's coming in from his people around him has been supporting his new behavior, which is, I feel that you're present. Our meetings are shorter. I'm able to come in and get what I need done. And this is fantastic. You spend 15 minutes with me without looking at the phone, the computer, and everything else, the distractions. And we get it done. And so we see the success there and I'm like, oh, I love it. How do we get that into more, how do we grow that? How do we expand it?
A lot of people ask me, how do I do listening? What are the steps?
Yeah. We love a tactical list.
Yeah. So give me the ingredients, show me the recipe, what goes on the menu. And I kind of go, yes, and we do need to be able to prepare like they do in a restaurant. In a restaurant, they have a concept of mise en place, which is a French word for preparation. And again, back to the orchestra analogy, you need to prepare to listen. You can't do that. You'll build a house on a false foundation if you try and do the listening. You have to adopt a mindset that by being listening rather than doing listening, you change the system, as your client just so beautifully role modeled. Meetings become shorter. People say what they mean. They get to the important things that they want to discuss. Yet we do crave the ingredients and the recipes. So I just want to give a couple of simple steps for leaders to consider to bring a listening being to a meeting rather than a listening doing. I need to listen because I need to figure out what the to-do is and go in action, and off we go. Yes, and I want to talk about the regular team meeting as an example. I was working with a leader in London about 8 weeks ago. My team doesn't turn up on time. My meetings are boring and predictable. The agenda's the same every week. What do I do? I said, look, I'm not qualified to answer that, and it'd be arrogant of me to offer you suggestions. What have you already tried? And he said, well, I haven't. I just copied what my manager did. I went, that's okay. If your meeting was a color today, what color would it be? And they said, oh, dark, beigey, brown. It's just, I said, what color would you like it to be? He said, oh, maybe a bright green, a bright color, green. I was like, okay. go and ask each one of your team members in your one-on-one, not in the group meeting, the same question about color. What color's the meeting? And they all came back with a version of black to red or grey to azure, which is a bright blue, that blue you see in the sky. And he comes back next month and he says, well, what do I do with this? It's like, I got colors. I said, okay, you've got colors. But in listening, you've already set up a process that goes and signals to the group, hey, the meeting is probably the wrong color. I said, go back now and ask them each, what's one thing that needs to change in the team meeting? So he goes through this process again, one-on-one. Now, for some of you listening, you go, wow, this is slow. This is 60 days in, and we're talking about this thing. But the leader needs time to process it, and so does the team. Sometimes we rush change, and we jump ahead way too fast, and we don't create change in a way that the system can consume it. So wonderful suggestions. Hey, boss, why are you chairing the meeting? Good question. Hey, boss, let's collectively reset the agenda because we've had the same agenda from the previous boss. Give us a chance to set the agenda ourselves. Good suggestion. Boss, why is the meeting an hour? We could do it in half an hour. Really? We could do it in half an hour? We've been wasting an hour? We think so, boss. So they come together. They agree that one person is the chair. That's not the boss. And one person is the co-chair. This is an interesting role. The co-chair is the person who will do the meeting next. So they agree to do meetings 1, 2, 3, hand over to the next person. 1, 2, 3, hand over to the next person. Not 1, 1, 1 and keep rotating because they felt that created randomness. There wasn't a sense of continuity in learning. So I check in and he's like, much the reflection your client made. It's like, I don't do anything at these meetings. They do it themselves. And I said, and how did you discover that? He goes, well, I didn't come up with it, did I? I just listened to them. I said, oh, okay. I said, where else does this play out with your peers and with your manager? And then he went, oh, so it's not just with my team. And as a result of this, he talks about being able to go home and spend time with his family. He talks about getting weekends back. He talks about having the mindset and the mind space to work on the important things, not the transactional things. And his time horizons have moved from days and weeks to weeks and months. His hope is it's going to be quarters, but we'll take little steps at a time.
That's very transformational, and good things that are creating change are slow over time, just like you talked about. You know, it felt like it was a little bit longer than he wanted in the beginning, but 60 days is going to come and go, whether we want it to or not. But it's in creating that intentional small practice in there. He's tested it, he experimented it, like you said, and he was able to get so much information and to be able to validate and empower people on the team to be able to take on more responsibility, which they probably are interested in learning how to do that. And what a great example to be able to share. I'm curious, there's in the book you write about different levels of listening. You said there's 5 levels of listening. Do you mind talking about that? Because I feel like it really just goes a little bit deeper than what we're thinking. And I would love for you just to discuss the 5 levels of listening as you write about it.
For each of the 5 levels of listening, if you want, there's a deep dive, minimum 90 minutes, some 2.5 hour podcast episodes that go really deep. So we're just going to touch the surface today. Let me summarize the 5 levels of listening. Level 1 is listening to yourself. This is the foundation. Level 2 is listening to the content. What you hear, what you see, and what you sense. At level 1 and level 2, you are listening to things. When we move up for level 3, level 4, and level 5, you are listening for things. At level 3, you're listening for context. You're listening for backstory. You're listening for the language patterns we talked about earlier on. You're listening carefully for adjectives, absolutes, pronouns, time orientation. Are they stuck in the past? Are they stuck in the future? Are they big picture? Are they detail? At level 4, we're listening for their unsaid. Now, this plays out as an individual dialogue, but it also plays out in team dialogue. A very simple heuristic for you: if you lead a team and you're in a team meeting, keep a running tally of who hasn't spoken, because too many of us have an orientation to listen to who has spoken, and your role as the leader is to draw that out like a magnet. And then finally, level 5 is listening for their meaning, what it means for them. So you could listen to somebody say 3 is half of 8. And if you're listening for what they said, you would go, you're wrong. You just misspoke. 3 is not half of 8. 4 is half of 8. But you've listened to what they said, not what they meant. Their meaning was they were talking in geometry, not in math. If you actually fold 8 in half on its vertical axis, there are 2 3s facing each other. 3 is half of 8. Equally, if you turn the 8 on its side and bisected the 8 in the middle, 0 is half of 8 as well. When you just listen to what people say, you are listening with an orientation that says 4 is half of 8. And in every system in which people operate in, there isn't one exclusive, perfect answer to every question. There is a range. There is 3, there is 0, there is 4, and all are equally useful inputs into the answer. Yet when you're just listening to what they say and not what they mean, you'll never be able to understand a more cost-effective solution, a faster solution, a left field solution. So those 5 levels again: level 1, listening to yourself; level 2, listening to the content; level 3, listening for the context; level 4, listening for their unsaid; and then level 5, listening for their meaning. Now, a lot of people get excited and focus on level 4 because that's the real leverage move when it comes to listening. Our database of 27,000 workplace listeners, where we've been collecting what gets in the way of people's listening, 92% of people who've taken that survey are stuck between level 1 and level 2. That's where their listening is at. So for all of us, just doing the basics will make a big difference. In sport, there's a concept called the broader the base, the higher the apex, which basically means the more participants you can get in a sport, the more likely you are to find an Olympic level athlete. And the same is true when it comes to listening. The broader the foundation you can create at level 1, listening to yourself, the faster you can scale to the heights of level 5. You can wing it, you can guess it, and you can occasionally get inconsistently good experiences with listening at levels 3, 4, and 5. Yet, if you want to have foundational impact, systemic impact, if you want to be listening rather than do listening, the biggest work is on yourself. It's not necessarily listening to what the speaker says. And important practices like preparing are crucial for that. Do you have a favorite level, Katie?
I love listening to what is not being said.
Hmm.
And I like to kind of pick at it and explore it and see where it goes and see how comfortable they are with sharing. And
Do you have a go-to question for that?
I don't have a go-to question. It's more of me in the room or listening. And when I listen, I feel like I listen even better when I'm not on camera and I'm just on the phone with my earbuds in, and I may be, staring out the window, but just really listening to what it is that they're saying, the word choice, the tone, the delivery, the pause. Now, there are some occasions where I do need to be on the video because it's too monotone, but I would say the bulk of it is when I'm just truly unplugged from everything, sitting in my office, really just listening and hearing what's being said, and then trying to figure out, how far can I ask? How far are they going to be comfortable?
And what you've just highlighted is a consciousness that not many listeners have. We have a primary listening orientation that is either auditory first and visual second, or visual first, auditory second. And an example that you just used, I'm comfortable audio only. I'm comfortable listening with my eyes closed. I can hear greater vocal variety when I don't have the visual distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite. People who are visual first and auditory second in their listening will say things like, I really miss face-to-face meetings because I'm not getting all the cues from video conferencing. I need to be face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball with someone to focus myself when I listen to them. They place great deal of importance on the nonverbals as much as the verbals. They also value visual cues in terms of this is the agenda for the meeting and it's shown rather than said, because the way they process is visual first or auditory second. You can use that heuristic, you can use that little test. Is simply if you're on a video conference and you're a participant in a group conversation and it's appropriate, close your eyes for a period of the conversation. Either it will be a very relaxing place for you and your listening is wow, or you'll go, oh, this is confusing, this is hard, this is difficult. What you've just learned, your primary visual first, auditory second. If your eyes are closed and it's easy to do, your primary auditory first, visual second. Now, as important as to know that for you, the reason you want to know that for yourself is once you know it for yourself, you know what's productive for you, but you equally have to know what's productive for the other person as well. That's why some of your best friends, you can be walking and talking on the phone and you're both audio only and it works. And yet I have other friends that's like, Oscar, I need to see you. It's like, let's go have a coffee. Oscar, can you hop onto a Zoom? And it's like, always, no problem. So the skill of the leader is to adjust their listening orientation to be productive for both in the conversation, not just you.
I agree completely. I think we need to tailor because we don't know who the recipient is of the conversation. And in the beginning, we may need to experiment with both a video talk and see how that goes. And then over time, I begin to see how people transition and what their comfort level is. And sometimes we need to stick with the video because the clues are not coming through the audio. And so as we expose ourselves to more and more people and get to have these conversations, we get to continue to grow, or I get to continue to grow and find effective ways to communicate or try to. And listening is very different. And then at that point, I'm listening with my eyes, and I can pick up on all those nonverbal clues. I love it when we, have to go into negotiations and you see the nonverbals that are happening. It is so, for me, I'm like, oh, it's so fun. But, it's not always fun. But it's communicating, whether we're speaking or not.
Yeah. And yesterday I was interviewing a former police investigator, and he was talking about the importance of rapport. And I asked about rapport in video. How do you create rapport in video? And he says, oh, well, that's really simple, Oscar. He says, look at your background. You're giving me so many rapport clues in your background. So be careful if you're a leader who shows up with a blurred background or a corporate background, because we're getting a really one-dimensional perspective of you. Why are you showing up with your own background visible? Because you're a leader and you're role modeling to others that it's okay to be your complete self on video. Now, there may be corporate standards that you need to adhere to and you have followed the compliance training. That's up to you. If you operate in those systems, let that be your choice. But, Katie, what's one thing that's kind of sticking out in my nonverbal signals in my background that you kind of connect with, that straight away you go, oh, if I could have a conversation with Oscar about that?
Yeah, I think the very first time we chatted, I talked about your background. I think it's just a nice, easy way to start a conversation. I see your books in the background. I see lots of candles that are lit, different mementos. I mean, I think I could just say, hey, what's on the middle shelf? And we could have a 30-minute conversation about it, because I imagine there's a story, much like, the artwork behind me. I have stories about all of that stuff. And it's a way to share who we are without saying who we are.
And yet it speaks so loudly about what matters to us. It signals meaning. This means a lot to me. My grandkids, my Lego that they built for me, Katie's stained glass church, the galaxy. There are stories behind each of those. And if we show up as full adult humans in a conversation, we're going to let people see that and see a part of us that will help to go, hey, we're full of flaws. We make mistakes too. We have joy in our life, and this is what brings us joy. And I think just experimenting and showing a little bit more of that makes you a charismatic leader without being evangelistic about it. Meaning you can create a magnetic connection with somebody just by sharing a little bit more about who you are beyond the conversation that's about the task.
I think I agree completely with the humility that we can show and be able to share ideas and a little bit of who we are. Oscar, if people want to follow your work, get to reach out to you, learn more with what you're doing, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
As much as I'd love you to get in touch with me, I'd rather you got in touch with your listening. If you visit listeningquiz.com, you can take a little 7-minute assessment. You'll get a report that tells you primary and secondary listening barriers, and the report will give you tailored tips specifically to your primary listening barriers. You can join over 27,000 other people globally who've learned a little bit more about their listening. Then, if you want to get in touch with me for other resources, the report has got all the coordinates for that. Listeningquiz.com should be the place you look to improve your listening.
Listeningquiz.com. I have been out there myself. You do a wonderful job of sending the emails to educate us a little bit at a time and not overwhelm us, so we can take it in and begin to implement. I love the fact that we had a conversation not too long ago on episode 140 of Business Vitality, and here we are recording another session to continue the conversation, to teach me how to listen better. And Oscar Trimboli. You are the author of How to Listen. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you just continuing to share, to pay it forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for listening to Oscar. He is fantastic. I hope that you were at least be able to grab one tip or trick that he shared. He has a plethora of ideas in that book, so feel free to check it out. Get it on Amazon. He has playing cards that go with it. He has the short book that goes with it. I mean, just great practical applications. And for those of you that are just catching this, my name is Cantey. I'm an executive coach and a podcast host of Business Vitality, where we share interviews like this with our listeners. And the goal is just to get back to the business basics. What are the things that people are doing to remain vital in business year over year, decade after decade? Communication is a vital aspect of business. And so being able to talk to Oscar and other professionals like this, we're able to just understand what are some good practical applications that we can go ahead and begin to implement to create change in organizations. Again, my name is Cantey. I'm an executive coach and a podcast host of Business Vitality. I work with teams and individuals to create measured leadership change within organizations. We use practical applications in order to accelerate the results. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. You can find me at catherinecantey.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you, possibly a takeaway that you got, or possibly if you want to be able to begin to implement some of this work. Feel free to reach out to me. I love to hear from folks. A lot of times, the beginning of our conversations start with, I don't even know if you can help me. And you know what? If I can't, I'll let you know and I'll point you in a direction of maybe somebody who can, or we can co-create a solution to help solve some problems and create more opportunities that are out there waiting on us. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.